hello. Greetings everyone. So this is Thomas Daffern again, and it's my weekly talk once more. It's my day of fasting in protest at the craziness of the world. One day a week is a reasonable gesture, I think. And it gives me time to reflect, go deeply inward. I've actually been doing the Sunday fast every day, every week since well, over a year now. It doesn't look like I'm going to be stopping soon because I'm doing it until Brexit is reversed in a second referendum. COVID-19 is cured and stopped and we're all let out. And world peace comes and we can open the Golden Gate in the temple of, the Holy Mount in Jerusalem. So a small but significant gesture towards three very difficult asks. But I'm an optimist. They're all doable, actually. Okay, so let me say that since the last time we spoke, there have been some developments this week which I'll be catching up with. I gave an interview on a friend of mine, Satyen Raja's page called Warrior Sage. He's an interesting guy living in Canada. Near Vancouver. I know Canada very well. I'm a Canadian citizen by law and birth, as well as a British and European citizen. And we had a good old chat. So if you're interested, watch that. That was a sort of bearing of the soul in certain specific areas. Satyen is a good interviewer. So, and also his website, his group is brilliant. The Warrior Sage Ideas, people with real commitment to truth, to peace, non-violence, but to have as much discipline as a warrior. You see, I've always argued as a Druid and with my colleagues that, being a peace activist is not a sort of an easy path for cowardice. Gandhi said the same. You don't become a peace activist or a Druid because you can't, don't want to fight. I didn't become a conscientious objector in my youth at school when we were supposed to go and fight in the school corps. And I said no, I was a conscientious objector. And I've kept that position ever since. I don't agree with wars, but it's not just being opposed to wars. I actually want to understand their cause, and I want to oppose the cause of the wars, which I think is a corrupt geopolitical system of nation states who have inbuilt military industrial interests in actually propagating wars. And if you look at the origin of wars in European and world history, they're always corrupt. The idea of a just war is a fantasy, in my opinion. It's better than an unjust war, and at least there were a few regulations, like, you wouldn't kill innocent men, women and children, you wouldn't kill non-combatants. My dear colleague Saint Adomnan, who was Bishop of Iona, brought that to the Irish, that there should be limitations on war. It was the first real treaty, apart from Muhammad's attempt to limit war according to, certain rules. Caesar had no such limitations when he invaded Gaul. He massacred all the Gauls, 3 million of us, and also the Druids he went for because they were the intellectuals. Just as the Nazis went for the intellectuals when they invaded Poland. You crush the intellectuals, then everyone else follows like sheep. Well, I'm opposed to that. As a peace Druid of Britain and Europe, I'm saying let the intellectuals fight back, let the Druids come together, and let the warrior sages of all religions, they exist in all religions, the rishis, the Tirthankaras of Jainism, the bodhisattvas of Buddhism, all these people are sworn to non-violence, but we could call it intelligence in the cosmic sense of the word, to oppose war. So, what do I mean by intelligence? I mean cosmic intelligence is what Buddha was talking about. The word buddhi in Sanskrit means cosmic intelligence or intellect. Buddhi is the Sanskrit word for intellect. So a Buddhist or a Buddha is a cosmic intellectual who's broken through with their higher mind into the enlightenment fields. And I talked about this on my interview with the Warrior Sage channel, so you can listen to that. I'm not going to repeat everything I said there. This is an update, and the work continues, right? So greetings to everyone from that community and to Satyen. I want to say that there's also been a very important conference which I listened to, which was brought to my attention through the World Intellectual Forum. Birendra Kumar, thank you so much for telling me about this very important peace conference that took place yesterday on the 25th of April. And what it did was it was supposed to be meeting in New York at Riverside Church. I know it well. I know that part of New York, not far from the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. It's one of my favourite parts of the world, those few streets in New York. I used to love a bookshop there called Papyrus, which I hear is shut down. It's my favourite bookshop in the world. But sadly, it's gone. I think it's tragic. Yeah, so I love the library at Columbia University, which is just near there as well. I've spent many happy hours in there. And as I explained to Satya in my interview, I'm really a library, devotee. Wherever I go, I hit the libraries. And I'm determined I will hit the library in heaven, as St. Alfred also insisted, King Alfred rather. He was never actually made a saint. I think that's a lacuna. He ought to be. Yeah, he was a warrior sage, okay? More on the warrior side than I am. But in his day and age, you had to be. So this conference that took place was incredibly important. And it was a gathering of peace thinkers, peace activists, peace intellectuals from all over the planet discussing the interconnectedness of peace and the search for a solution to nuclear weapons that continue to bedevil the planet. Speaker after speaker made the point that if we don't like this lockdown, just imagine what it will be like after a nuclear war. I mean, at least now we've got food, we've got essential goods getting through, we've got the comfort of our homes, we've got electricity, we've got the phone system. Imagine all that taken from us, and you literally can't go out because of the radioactivity in the air. Imagine the world food chain is shut down because of nuclear winter. The dust and debris from nuclear explosions going on all over the place, taking out 100 cities worldwide, would block out the sun for several months minimally. As scientists have researched this nuclear winter, you can Google it. And so what we were saying in this conference, I wasn't a speaker, I was just one of the audience, is this has to also remain a priority on the activist list. So yes, find out what caused the virus, cure it, and find out what's going on in other problems, and also prevent nuclear war. That's on my fasting list. Okay, so so who spoke? Well, we were introduced by Emily Rubino, who's an amazing young woman, who's a graduate of Fordham University in New York with a BA in International Humanitarian Affairs and Sociology. She's a lovely person. Thank you, Emily, for organising it. She was one of the core committee, and she was like the link between the different speakers, but she's obviously a passionate, engaged intellectual. We also had someone from India who was, again, an activist from the northeast of India, Beena Nepram, who was brilliant, doing talks. One of the speakers who was very important was the first one, Wada Masako, who was actually in Nagasaki when the A-bomb dropped and was only about 2 miles from the actual focus of the bomb. But she explained that incredibly, and she was a very young child, she survived because the shape of Nagasaki meant there was a kind of mountain in the way. And so she survived unscathed, incredibly. But 70,000 people didn't, and many of them died either instantaneously in the blast or the fires that came, or in the fallout, the radioactivity, or in injuries sustained, continuing to die after that. 70,000 people in one moment, right? In Hiroshima, a few days before, it had been even worse. 145,000 people had died. So she's what's called a hibakusha, a survivor of this atomic atrocity, and they took a pledge to speak out about it and to try and prevent this ever happening again. They're trying to stop your city, New York or Moscow or London, from this happening to those beautiful cities. I've travelled to many cities around the world, you know, to Jerusalem, to Fez, to Delhi, to Hyderabad, you know, to Birmingham, to Paris, to Marseille. I mean, I love cities. I'm like Socrates, you know, I don't want the city to be abandoned. I want to stay in the city and talk in the marketplace. That's why I bother to record these talks and so on. Socrates loved his city, he loved Athens. That's why he would never run away. When Athens council said he was a heretic and should be killed, his friends said, oh, well, why don't you run away? You know, go and hide in the forests. He said, no, I love my city. I won't run away. You know, and that's my position. I was born in Montreal, which, again, I love that city. I love them all equally. I haven't yet been to Mecca. I hope to get to Mecca before I die. I have hopes of creating a peace institute in Mecca one day and to look at Islamic peace teachings. If someone from Arabia wants to contact me, I will advise academically on how we could do that. And I would ask for a special dispensation to be granted to peace scholars to visit the Peace Institute of Mecca, who may not be Muslims in the technical sense. They may be whatever, Buddhist or, you know, Christian, but special dispensation, special card signed by the King of Saudi Arabia. If they're a peace pilgrim, they can come to the Peace Institute and have lectures and discuss peace at its best, both within Islam and all the other faiths. And that's why I've done a commentary on the Quran. I hope that it will be studied in the Peace Institute of Mecca in the years to come, after I'm long gone. Because Mecca is another place that stands for peace on the planet. So let it stand universally. I also haven't been to Kyoto, and I haven't been to Hiroshima yet, or Nagasaki. I hope one day to visit, you know, Japan and China. I've not been to Beijing or Shanghai. So she spoke, Wada Masako, very, very moving. And she's an actual survivor of the incidents, and she spent her whole life trying to warn us to not repeat this, ever. And the only way we can do that is to actually get an agreement to get rid of these weapons. And to generate enough political will through education so that our political leaders that we elect sign up, you know, to do that. Then we had a brilliant talk by a Costa Rican medical doctor, Dr. Carlos Umana, who is Regional Vice President for Latin America for IPPNW, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. I'm president of IPPNW in Costa Rica. Now, I've been to conferences of IPPNW. I worked with them from the 90s onwards because I was coordinator of international philosophers for the prevention of nuclear war. And as a philosopher, you know, I respect the work of our medical colleagues, and they respect our work as philosophers. We're doing the same work, trying to get clarity, trying to analyse the causes of conflict, trying to, you know, see how we can prevent it. And the medical doctor is concerned with the physical well-being of the victims, but the philosopher's more concerned with the intellectual well-being of the people that might be causing the conflict in the first place. Our job is therefore preventing the wars. And that's why I've worked closely with IPPNW. Anyway, this guy was a genius. He's a young man, brilliant. And he spoke about the moves internationally to get nuclear weapons banned and why morally that's so important. He spoke about the very important treaty for, you know, abolishing nuclear weapons, which has been passed in the UN in 2017. And already quite a lot of countries have signed up to it. I've given the text of this treaty in my little book of peace declarations, which I published last week, which you can get, it's on the internet. And we need, unfortunately, none of the nuclear weapon states have signed up. UK, Israel, America, Russia, you know. That comes from us, the people's will. We have to insist that our political representatives, they're after all just representatives, they're not our dictators yet, bow to the public and get rid of these nuclear weapons. Now, how are we going to get them to do that? Well, Carlos Umana gave some very good ideas, and he, as a physician, he warned why we have to do it. He spoke very eloquently and with very, very convincing arguments. So do listen to his talk. This is on the internet. You'll find it on my my Facebook page, or you'll find it on the website of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, which is a German academic institute for peace. They were one of the co-organisers of this event, and it's on there. Then we heard from a younger woman, Gia Bastida, who's Mexican and Chilean American, and she lived in New York, and she's a young spokesman for the indigenous community of the Americas. And she's talking about climate justice and why stopping nuclear weapons is also about climate justice. Because, you know, we campaign against climate change and global warming, but a nuclear war would be the most catastrophic, destructive, and you know, cataclysmic, instantaneous climate change experience that humanity's ever had. We'd get instant roasting alive in multiple cities around the world. And then we'd get a nuclear winter. I mean, there would be no crops, there would be no sun in the sky for 6 months or something, or, you know, it would be like the worst horror movie you've ever seen. And millions would have died in the first few, you know, actually minutes of these exchanges. And so, so as a climate change activist, she's realised that campaigning against nuclear weapons is actually part of her mandate. I'm amazed at the lack of awareness of this among the whole Extinction Rebellion movement. Greta and her colleagues, and then the group in London and Britain that organised the big, you know, march on London. They don't ever seem to mention the importance of campaigning also at the same time for peace against nuclear weapons. It's as if, you know, I mean, I don't know, what is it about the British sort of campaigners? Why don't they join up these issues? Why wasn't Bruce Kent invited to speak at those events? You know, the Green Movement and the Peace Movement, like, they're one movement, okay? I mean, people like Caroline Lucas, the MP, know that. Why don't they get it? The chap that was the main brains behind the Extinction Rebellion, who was doing a PhD at King's College, where I was a student myself at some point, he never seems to make the links, you know. So there's some joined up thinking to be done, and this conference was doing it. And I don't know, what is it? In New York, people can think clearer? I don't know. Or is it because, well, she was only, I think, 19, this woman. Amazing. Thank you. And she said on behalf of the indigenous people of the world that, you know, climate change, the destruction of the forests and the Amazon, the destruction of the native, you know, living space all around the planet, which might have, you know, sort of winkled the bats out of their caves, so they've taken their revenge by killing us all. You know, that encroachment into nature, and the desecration of nature that Brian Rose talks about in his documentary that I watched recently, called Reconnecting or something. You know, he goes off into the jungle in Costa Rica and takes ayahuasca, and it's a beautiful, soulful tribute to his own spiritual journey. I mean, he's an interesting guy, Brian Rose. And yeah, so the indigenous people are saying, wake up, you know, save the planet, the environment, and that includes save the cities, you know, and prevent nuclear war. I mean, that is something that statistically, as Carlos Umana pointed out, is almost certainly going to happen in our lifetimes otherwise, by accident. There was some figures shared that were rather scary. There have been 1,000 nuclear accidents in the USA, and some of them have come very close to launching a nuclear war by accident. The whole thing hinges on the electronic warning systems, which are all robotized and mechanized. Now, they can go wrong. And I've been told stories when I was involved in an academic protest at Faslane in Scotland, where Britain's nuclear weapons fleets and weapons are stored, near the Castle of the Muses, where I lived for 7 years. You know, we heard from speakers that there's apparently a famous story when Yeltsin had just taken over as president in Russia, and they brought him the launch codes and said, the Americans are attacking, missiles are coming. And they, you know, burst into his rooms in the Kremlin and insisted he press the button. This was top generals, you know. We've only got a few minutes reaction time. You've got to press now. Yeltsin was slightly drunk and in his bear-like Russian way said, I don't believe it yet. And thank God he saved the world because, you know, a Jobsworth president would have just probably pressed the button. He said, I don't believe it. And it turned out it was a flock of birds. It was a completely false alarm. Thank you, Mr. Yeltsin. You know, thank you for your vodka. Please, you know, but look how close we came to instant destruction. There'd be nobody to record this talk. There'd be nobody listening if he'd have pressed that button. And, you know, who's to say the next time it happens that the American or Russian or Chinese or whatever French leader would be that humane? You know, think about Russians as they tend to bend the rules a bit. He broke the rules and he saved the world. That is a lesson in, I think, why political anarchism is always needed, as well as rule following. The world also spends $116 billion a year on these nuclear weapons. This is not small stuff we're talking about. That's why this conference was so important. Then we heard from another activist from India, from Japan, who has been active in the peace movement. He's vice president of the International Peace Bureau in Japan, and you know, was part of the core organising committee of the whole event. So thank you, Hiroshi, who spoke very movingly. Then we heard from Joseph Gerson, who I think lives in New York, and he's very active. He's another vice president of the International Peace Bureau, an organisation I've worked with for many years. Bruce Kent, I think, was, I think he's an international vice president, and obviously with my mother they attended very many conferences of the International Peace Bureau. And I was sent to India by them to a conference which led to the setting up of the World Intellectual Forum, and used to know the Secretary General of this organisation very well. And it, by the way, it is the world's leading peace umbrella group. So I run a sort of specialist group that looks at peace studies and philosophy. I'm involved with the international group of philosophers that work for peace and historians. And there are other similar things, you know, that we all work in our own specialism. But then there's the International Peace Bureau brings it all together into one umbrella and tries to do joined up activism. And of course the greatest activism I think we can do is thinking. I mean, we can go on marches and that's important, and we can wave banners and we can do sit downs and we can do you know, the reverse strikes, like Danilo Dolci said. I mean, I would like every university in the world to have a peace studies department where you can be studying this stuff. I mean, if the world is a few, you know, months, years away from self-destruction, shouldn't we put down our, you know, PhDs on whatever, you know, some obscure medieval poet and you know, whether or not he was in love with nature, and actually apply the knowledge we have to peace and to solving contemporary, current global problems. As an academic, I think we need to do our detailed research in all the details of knowledge, but then we also have to have a place where we come into the general clearinghouse of academic sharing from every different discipline. So peace studies involves anthropology, sociology, political science, philosophy, ethics, spirituality, comparative religion, history, economics, you know, you name it. So, yes, Joseph Gerson, a great man, I can tell a kindred spirit, a real activist. He's written a book called The Empire and the Bomb, how the US uses nuclear weapons to dominate the world. Yes, hello Joseph, you know, like a younger Chomsky, I would say. On fire with the desire for truth. Well, these people only got 10 minutes each. I mean, it was a shame. You could have listened to any of them for like hours. And then we heard from an amazing vicar, actually. I think I'm in love with this woman. She's called Reverend Liz Theoharis. She had a crystal clear intellect, a beautiful pure heart, and a strong will that, you know, reminded me of the best aspects of the American character. She's co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral reviver. And she also is director of the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights and Social Justice at the Union Theological Seminary in New York, which I visited. I spent, as I say, I'm a library aficionado. I spent many happy hours in the library there. It's where all the kind of mainstream theologians of America can train. It turns out vicars, as we would say in English. They call them pastors or whatever. And but you know, very, very highly informed people. And she is campaigning. She is drawing the link between nuclear weapons, the military, vast sums being spent on this, and poverty in America, but globally. And she wants, what they're doing with this campaign is presenting a poor people's moral budget each year to Congress. And there's 140 million poor people in the USA. Like the vast majority of Americans are not rich. You know, we think of America as the richest country in the world. No, that's an illusion created by the banking system. That there's an awful lot of, you know, high value capital stored up in the American banking system that creates on paper the illusion that it's a wealthy country. But actually go and travel around and there's 140 million poor people. She's their spokesperson, right? And she's very much following in the tradition of Martin Luther King. A lot of them are people of, you know, colour and indigenous traditions. And who speaks for them? So she made this question that there has to be a new moral transformation in America, in the same way that Martin Luther King organised people in the 1960s and the civil rights movement. There has to be, you know, ending poverty is the new civil right. And part of that, the strategy is ending the nuclear weapons campaigns worldwide. I couldn't agree more. Liz, I think you're amazing. She's an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church and a biblical scholar, so, you know, blessings to her. Incredible woman. Then we heard from an amazing guy from the Middle East, Imad Kiyai, who works for the... He's the author of a book called Weapons of Mass Destruction, A New Approach to Non-Proliferation. And he's director at the Middle East Treaty Organization. And I hadn't heard of this thing, so I really take my hat off to him. And I set up some time ago the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. So I will be in touch with him. We must work together, because what these people have done is they want to campaign for a totally non-nuclear Middle East. They want nuclear weapons kicked out of the entire region, all the way from the Mediterranean Sea, you know, over through to whatever the deserts of Turkestan or far Central Asia. And they've created a treaty which they've drafted, in which every member state would pledge not to have nuclear weapons. Now, he said he's not a naive person. He's Iranian in origin. Whether he lives in Iran, I don't know. He probably does. You see, Iran has pledged never to build nuclear weapons. And the president or the various leaders, spiritual elders of Iran, have said nuclear weapons are anti-Islamic. Now, that's my own theological position. They're not only anti-Islamic, they're anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, anti-Buddhist, anti-pagan, anti-Druid, anti-any ethical system that you can think of. They're only a terrible, urgent thing that somebody thought was a good idea in World War II because we were afraid the Nazis were getting them. So the West, the British and the Americans cooked them up, you know, because the other guys were getting them. Well, we need to put the genie back in the bottle because the Nazis weren't getting them. We're way behind in the research. And, yeah, they've got to be undone. So I support 100% his campaigns. I mean, the problem, of course, is Israel is the only nuclear weapons state in the entire Middle East, unless you count Pakistan. And Israel is armed with them, has that technology. And so, as part of this package deal, has to come a final settlement of the Israeli and Palestinian issue and the normalization of relations between Israel and all other states in the Middle East. You know, they have to sign a treaty of non-violence, a treaty of peace. There has to be a settlement of all the outstanding problems. Now, Trump and Netanyahu proposed this peace deal. They didn't talk about nuclear weapons. They didn't talk about any other states, Jordan, Syria. In my critical commentary on that peace deal, I've put in these other issues. I will send a copy of it to our friend Imad in Iran, if I can contact him, and see what, where we can take this. Because the Trump deal, at least it's something, it's on the table. And, of course, it needs to be totally changed, but, might as well work with the text and then change it. So I agree 100% with the idea of a weapons of mass destruction free zone, because it's not, they don't just want nuclear weapon free, at least, they want chemical and biological weapons free. And obviously nobody wants people inventing these things and developing them. And if you think of the horror and the lies that have been told about, it's used as a sort of a stick to beat Middle Eastern countries with, and yet America and Britain have huge amounts of nuclear weapons and chemical and biological capacity too. So anyway, he was a very articulate, intelligent speaker. Listen to his talk. And I, 100% agree with what he's doing. Then we had a brilliant talk by Sharan Burrow, an Australian woman, who is a trade unionist, and she brought in a whole new dimension, namely the role of trade unions. Now, she's the General Secretary of one of the largest conglomerations of trade unions on the planet. It's called the International Trade Union Confederation. Represents 207 million workers in 163 countries, and it has 331 national affiliates. I'm not sure if the TUC is a member of this. I'm not sure the politics of international trade unionism. If not, they're certainly in collaboration at some level. There are European members, although a lot of the trade unions involved are in the south, in developing countries. So incredibly important, because a lot of the workers there are the ones that are suffering from insecurity and low-paid jobs, and also the bias towards militarism in the global economy. The fact that the best jobs are to do with weapons development and R&D on militarism. That's the skewed nature of our global militarized economy. And she spoke about this very, very eloquently. She's an amazing woman. I take my hat off to Sharan Burrow. And then we heard an impassioned speech by the director of the International Peace Bureau, who is called Rainer Braun, who again spoke very well, from Berlin. I've not met him. He's been active since the 80s, like me, and he was active against cruise missiles stationed in Germany in 1982 with his Krefelder appeal. Well, I founded Philosophers and Historians of Peace in 1984, just after that. And we used to have meetings in Notting Hill Gate and in London, discussing at that time. So we're veterans of the same struggle, in effect. He's served also as Executive Director of Scientists for Peace and Sustainability in Germany. And he's worked on various projects at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. So I imagine he's a kind of historian of science. He's written a book called Einstein and Peace, and also a biography about Joseph Rotblat, who I met briefly at the end of his life, who was one of the founders of Pugwash with Einstein, and who was involved with the Manhattan Project, but then, like so many other scientists, realised it was not a good idea to, after they'd successfully made the atomic bomb and cracked the codes, as it were, they then felt, well, this knowledge is so dangerous that it shouldn't be used by nations in a sort of fanatical, quest for power in the normal sense. A bit like in the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, where there are certain weapons that are so dangerous that the gods never use them even. They don't share them with mankind. Nuclear weapons are part of that. They're not to be used,